The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. Every eye in the room was locked on the young boy standing at the witness stand. Just 12 years old, his small hands gripped the wooden edge as he took a deep breath. His voice was steady, but the weight of his words sent a shockwave through the room. "The cops beat me," he said, his eyes locked onto the judge. Gasps echoed through the courtroom, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and fear flashing across the faces of those watching. Seated just a few feet away, the officers in question sat rigid, their faces unreadable. Lawyers exchanged quick glances, some scribbling notes, others frozen in place. The boy's mother, her hands clenched together, held back tears as she watched her son relive the nightmare. The judge, normally composed, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. This wasn't just another case. This was about justice, about truth, about a child whose voice refused to be silenced. But just when it seemed like the truth was finally coming to light, something happened that no one saw coming. A ripple of movement in the courtroom, a sudden interruption that would change everything. What happened next left even the most hardened officials in shock, making it clear that this case was far from over. What was revealed in the next few moments would challenge everything people thought they knew. Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the courtroom, but the tension was already spreading like wildfire. The boy's words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. Whispers rippled through the audience, some shaking their heads in disbelief while others leaned in, eager to hear what would happen next. The prosecutor adjusted his glasses, glancing at the officers seated at the defense table. Their faces remained stiff, unreadable, but there was something in their posture, something uneasy. The boy's mother squeezed her hands together, her lips pressed into a thin line, as if bracing herself for whatever came next. She had fought to get this far, to make sure her son's voice was heard. But now that they were here, standing on the edge of the truth, she knew this moment could change everything. Then, just as the judge was about to speak, a door at the back of the courtroom creaked open. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, his presence unnoticed by most, except for the officers. One of them shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. The boy noticed it too. His wide eyes flickered toward the man, recognition flashing across his face. But he didn't say anything. Not yet. The tension in the room grew thicker. The boy's hands trembled slightly, but he stayed strong, standing tall. He had already spoken his truth. Now the question was, what would happen next? Because something was coming, something no one in that room was prepared for. And when it hit, the real story would finally begin. The boy's eyes stayed locked on the man who had just entered the courtroom. He didn't know his name, but he knew what he had seen. His fingers curled into a fist at his side, his heart pounding in his chest. The officers at the defense table still weren't looking at him. They were looking at the man, their expressions unreadable, but their body language betraying something else. Unease, maybe even fear. The judge finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Continue," he said, directing his gaze at the boy. The boy hesitated for a brief second, then took another deep breath. "They took me behind the building," he said, his voice steady but quieter than before. "I kept saying I didn't do anything, but they wouldn't listen." He swallowed hard, stealing another glance at the man in the suit. The man wasn't watching him. He was watching the officers. From the back of the courtroom, the boy's mother stiffened, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She knew her son wasn't lying. She had seen the bruises, heard the fear in his voice that night. But getting people to believe the truth was something else entirely, especially when the ones accused were the very people who were supposed to protect them. The prosecutor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And what happened next?" he asked, his tone careful, controlled. The boy's lips parted as if to answer, but before he could speak, one of the officers suddenly cleared his throat. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of the room, it felt like a gunshot. The judge turned his gaze to him. "Do you have something to say?" the judge asked. The officer shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie. "No, Your Honor," he replied smoothly, too smoothly. Something wasn't right. Everyone in the courtroom could feel it. The officers weren't just uncomfortable, they were on edge. And the man in the suit, the one who had just arrived, was watching everything closely, like he was waiting for something. The boy looked back at his mother, her expression unreadable but filled with something he recognized. Determination. She had fought too hard for this moment. He had spoken the truth, but something told him that the real battle was just beginning. The courtroom felt colder now, the silence stretching long enough to make everyone uneasy. The boy's throat was dry, but he forced himself to stay strong. He had already come this far. He couldn't stop now. He looked back at the judge, his small hands gripping the edge of the stand. "They told me to stop talking," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "They said no one would believe me." A murmur spread through the room. The prosecutor straightened in his seat, sensing that something bigger was about to unfold. The officers, however, remained still, too still. Their eyes darted toward the man in the suit, waiting, watching, but he gave nothing away. The judge's expression darkened. He turned to the officers. "Is there anything you'd like to say about this testimony?" His voice carried the weight of authority, but still none of them spoke. The tension was suffocating now. Even the audience in the back, people who had come out of curiosity or support, felt the weight of the moment. The boy's mother shifted forward in her seat, her heart pounding. She knew her son was telling the truth, but what she didn't know, what no one knew, was how far certain people would go to keep that truth buried. Then, just as the prosecutor was about to press further, the courtroom door opened again. A woman entered, her heels clicking against the floor. She held a thick folder in her hands, her expression unreadable. The man in the suit finally reacted, his jaw tightening for the first time. Whatever was in that folder, whatever she was about to say, it was clear that it was something they didn't want coming to light. The boy watched everything unfold, his chest tightening. He wasn't sure what was about to happen next, but he knew one thing: this wasn't over, not even close. The woman with the folder didn't hesitate as she walked straight to the prosecutor's table. The tension in the room grew sharper, a silent storm brewing just beneath the surface. The man in the suit sat forward slightly, his eyes locked onto her every movement. The officers, who had been so still before, exchanged glances, their unease now impossible to ignore. The prosecutor took the folder and flipped it open. His eyes scanned the pages, his expression shifting almost immediately. A deep furrow formed between his brows. Whatever was in those documents, it wasn't just important, it was explosive. He exhaled sharply, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, choosing his words carefully, "I believe this evidence changes everything." The boy watched, his hands gripping the edge of the stand even tighter. He didn't know what was inside that folder, but he could feel it in his bones. This was bigger than just him. His mother, sitting near the back, leaned forward, her heart pounding. She had fought so hard for the truth to be heard, but now, for the first time, she wondered if she was truly ready for what that truth might mean. Then, out of nowhere, one of the officers stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, the sudden sound jolting through the courtroom like a gunshot. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. "Your Honor," he said, his voice tight, "I need to speak now." The room fell completely silent. The other officers didn't look at him. The man in the suit didn't move. And the boy, he just stared, his heart hammering in his chest. He had expected to fight for people to believe him. What he hadn't expected was for someone on the other side to break first. Whatever was about to be said next would change everything, but no one knew if the truth would finally set things right, or if it would make everything even worse. The woman with the folder didn't hesitate as she walked straight to the prosecutor's table. The tension in the room grew sharper, a silent storm brewing just beneath the surface. The man in the suit sat forward slightly, his eyes locked onto her every movement. The officers, who had been so still before, exchanged glances, their unease now impossible to ignore. The prosecutor took the folder and flipped it open. His eyes scanned the pages, his expression shifting almost immediately. A deep furrow formed between his brows. Whatever was in those documents, it wasn't just important, it was explosive. He exhaled sharply, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, choosing his words carefully, "I believe this evidence changes everything." The boy watched, his hands gripping the edge of the stand even tighter. He didn't know what was inside that folder, but he could feel it in his bones. This was bigger than just him. His mother, sitting near the back, leaned forward, her heart pounding. She'd have fought so hard for the truth to be heard, but now, for the first time, she wondered if she was truly ready for what that truth might mean. Then, out of nowhere, one of the officers stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, the sudden sound jolting through the courtroom like a gunshot. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. "Your Honor," he said, his voice tight, "I need to speak now." The room fell completely silent. The other officers didn't look at him. The man in the suit didn't move. And the boy, he just stared, his heart hammering in his chest. He had expected to fight for people to believe him. What he hadn't expected was for someone on the other side to break first. Whatever was about to be said next would change everything, but no one knew if the truth would finally set things right, or if it would make everything even worse. The courtroom held its breath. All eyes were on the officer who had just stood up, his hands gripping the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. The judge nodded, allowing him to speak. He hesitated, then exhaled sharply, as if bracing himself for what he was about to say. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he muttered, shaking his head. None of it was. A ripple of shock passed through the room. The prosecutor narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" he pressed. The officer swallowed hard, glancing at the others beside him. None of them moved. The man in the suit, who had remained so composed until now, finally shifted, his expression darkening. The officer's voice wavered before he steadied himself. "I wasn't the only one there that night." The boy sat frozen, his breath catching in his throat. He had spent weeks, months, reliving that night, trying to convince people of what had happened. Now, for the first time, someone else was confirming it. His mother's hands trembled in her lap, silent tears pooling in her eyes. The prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request a recess to review the evidence just presented." But before the judge could respond, the man in the suit finally spoke, his voice low and firm. "No need." Everyone turned toward him. Slowly, he rose from his seat, buttoning his jacket with calculated precision. "This case ends now," he said. "Or I promise you, the truth that comes next will be bigger than any of us can handle." A heavy silence followed. The judge's gaze hardened. The boy clenched his fists, a spark of anger flickering in his eyes. This was it, the moment where the truth was either buried for good or forced into the light. But just when it seemed like the final decision was about to be made, the officer who had spoken took a step back, shaking his head. "I won't be part of this anymore," he whispered. Then, in front of the entire courtroom, he turned and walked away. Gasps filled the air. The officers still seated looked stricken. The man in the suit remained calm, but something in his posture shifted. And then, in that moment, the boy realized something. The truth had already won. Even if they tried to cover it up, cracks had formed, and it was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. The judge straightened in his seat, his voice cutting through the tension. "This case is far from over," he declared, and as the gavel struck, the boy met his mother's gaze, knowing that while the fight wasn't finished, for the first time, they weren't fighting alone. The judge's gavel struck the wooden podium again, the sharp sound echoing through the courtroom. A heavy silence followed. No one moved. No one spoke. It felt like the weight of everything that had just unfolded was pressing down on every single person in that room. The boy sat frozen in the witness stand, his heart still racing. His mother, gripping the edge of her seat, let out a slow, shaky breath. The officer who had walked away didn't look back. His footsteps faded as he disappeared through the heavy wooden doors, leaving behind an even deeper silence. The remaining officers at the defense table looked tense, their eyes flickering toward the man in the suit. He still hadn't sat down. Instead, he stood there, completely still, his expression unreadable. The prosecutor finally broke the silence. "Your Honor," he said, his voice measured, "I request that we move forward with the evidence presented. It's clear that there's more to this case than we were led to believe." The judge nodded, his gaze lingering on the officers before turning back to the folder sitting on the prosecutor's desk. "Proceed," he said. The boy swallowed hard. He had come into this courtroom scared, unsure if anyone would believe him. But now, everything was shifting. The truth had cracked through the surface, and even those who had tried to bury it were no longer in control. The prosecutor flipped through the documents in the folder, then held up one sheet. "This," he said, "is a statement from an anonymous officer confirming that there were direct orders that night. Orders to make an example out of the boy." A wave of murmurs spread through the courtroom. The boy's mother's hands trembled. She had known something was wrong from the moment she saw her son that night, but hearing it confirmed in court made her stomach twist. One of the officers at the defense table shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "That's not true," he muttered under his breath, but even he didn't sound convinced. The prosecutor turned his attention to him. "Not true," he repeated. "Then why did one of your own walk out just now? Why is there documented proof that contradicts everything you said so far?" The officer didn't answer. The man in the suit finally moved, pressing his lips into a thin line. He knew they were losing control of the narrative. The judge took a deep breath and looked at the defense. "If there is anything you need to say in your defense, now is the time," he said firmly. The officers remained silent. The boy's eyes stung, but he refused to let any tears fall. He wasn't the scared kid they had tried to silence anymore. He had spoken, and now the truth was standing on its own. The prosecutor turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I move that we proceed with further investigation and disciplinary action against the officers involved." The judge nodded. This case is no longer just about one boy. It's about a system that failed him. He turned to the officers still seated. "I expect full cooperation moving forward. Anything less will have serious consequences." The boy's mother felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from sadness, but from relief. It wasn't over, not yet, but they were finally being heard. The courtroom slowly began to clear out after the session ended. People whispered amongst themselves, reporters scribbled notes, and some shook their heads in disbelief at what had just unfolded. The boy climbed down from the witness stand, his legs shaky but his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. His mother rushed to him, pulling him into her arms. "You did it," she whispered. "You told your story." The boy looked up at her. "Will they really do something about it?" he asked quietly. His mother hesitated, then nodded. "They have to," she said. "Too many people heard the truth today." The prosecutor approached them, his expression softer now. "You were brave today," he told the boy. "Braver than most adults I've seen in court." He knelt slightly so he was at eye level. "This isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of something bigger. And no matter what happens next, you should know you made a difference today." The boy nodded, taking in the words. For the first time in a long time, he felt like his voice had power. As they walked out of the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter. The sun was setting, casting golden streaks across the sky. His mother held his hand tightly, as if anchoring them both to this moment. A few reporters called out, but his mother shook her head, guiding him past them. They had already said everything they needed to say in the courtroom. Now, it was time to let the truth do the rest. Days passed, then weeks. News of the case spread. Protests grew. More officers came forward, revealing things that had been buried for too long. Investigations opened, and slowly things began to shift. The boy still carried the scars of that night, both the ones visible and the ones buried deeper. But he also carried something else now, hope. hoped that the world wasn't as unshakable as it seemed. That people, when faced with the truth, had the power to demand something better. One evening, he sat on the porch with his mother, watching the world go by. "Do you think they regret it?" he asked suddenly. His mother turned to him. "Who?" "The ones who did it. The ones who lied." She thought about it for a moment. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe they don't yet. But one day they will." The boy nodded, looking back at the horizon. The fight wasn't over, but they weren't alone in it anymore. And that was enough. For now.